You got to start this too?
Yeah.
These right here. Oops.
Oh, I wonder if I should do these as lives too, like on different platforms.
I think you should just do this one live right now.
And then just record these?
And then just record those, and then if you like it and you want to add that different layer in the next time, then I'd say,
yes,
let's do that. Don't pull a me. For everybody,
You're
for everybody
right.
watching out there.
I know. All right. So.
Level it up a little bit. Yeah.
Sit back.
Can you dim the light a little bit?
No, it actually look how it looks. Do you feel hot there?
No, I'm just looking here, and I just look a little white, shiny.
Let's see here. I think that's let me see what the setting is. I think I can dim it one more time. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. My complexion just shimmers. It just shimmers everything. You got that one going?
You good?
I think we're good.
All right. So see the tape. Try to keep your chair around the tape.
All right.
And try to stay tucked in so we can stay on camera. All right. Cool.
Cool.
All right. So the whole idea behind this. Let's get our coffee set up.
Yeah. We gotta. This doesn't look good enough for the camera, so we're gonna
make it look fancy.
We're gonna make it look fancy here on this Friday morning.
All right.
I love it.
I just put that here off camera. And now we have like fancy mugs. Cheers.
Cheers. Beautiful.
All right.
Oh, fantastic.
Cuban coffee. Gotta love that.
I love that. Oh, so this is from Troy's.
It's from Troy's, yeah.
Okay.
Troy's is okay.
It's all right.
Yeah. They're not bad. They got some good stuff. They got some okay stuff.
Well, when you said Cuban coffee, I started to realize, like, oh, it's like that makes a little bit more sense because you said you got it downstairs, and I'm like, you got espresso down in our lobby? I'm like, I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah, I wish we had espresso in our lobby.
There.
I'd be a crackhead downstairs. That's what I would be. I'd totally be a crackhead downstairs. No, well, I come from South Florida, so Cuban coffee, like, it's so much competition down there.
Yeah.
And it's like people who like came from Cuba who are like making your Cuban coffee. Like
So you feel it. So it's not just a taste.
It's not
it's a feeling.
It's like cocaine.
Legal.
It's
and darker. It's not as white.
It is darker. Yes, it's definitely darker. So I wanted to you know what? Because I don't know how I'm gonna ultimately do this whole thing, but I want this to be more of a conversation than anything else. And one of the things that I guess we first do is I guess like, who the hell are you? Who are you? Yeah, who are you? Who are you? What? Tell me. Tell the whoever's out there in the ether, like, who are you? What do you do? Where are you from?
Yeah, sure. So on June 28th of 1987, when I was two. No, so I mean, my name is chrischuck. I've been local here in Central Florida. I was born and raised. Spent about a year up in Jersey after college, attending UCF, and then moved back down. So been in Florida most of my life. Studied finance. I'm in real estate now.
What got you into real estate?
Always had like a passion for real estate. It's always been something that kind of sat on the back of my mind. And so I went to school for finance and was trying to ultimately, which I feel like a lot of people try and do, is who study finance, like, I'm going to get up into Wall Street. I'm going to do something in the investment world.
Oh, okay.
And that ultimately
like
just
stockbroker,
investment banking, something to do with the like strategy and things like that.
Now, what's the difference between like a stockbroker and an investment banker?
I mean, stockbrokers are typically the ones who are like brokering stock transactions, right? And investment bankers are more the people who are looking strategically at different things like buy and sell, private equities, things like that. Okay. So it's more of the analysis stuff, right? So looking behind it.
Well, that makes sense. Your personality is very much in that direction. I can see that.
Why I don't get a lot of stuff off the ground as quickly as I could. Right, but No, I wanted to do that, and ultimately, just life just didn't end up taking me there. Like the opportunities didn't present themselves, so I ended up moving into an array of different sales, everything from life insurance to solar to high-end gym and memberships. Did a little bit of construction grade fencing for contracting projects, and all of those opportunities actually ended for me, not on my own volition. It was just something outside of my control that ended up ending those opportunities.
Interesting. Okay.
So I just started thinking to myself, like after the last one ended, what was I gonna do? Like I had reset my pipeline so many times. I had, gone through the grind of, trying to prospect for the business. And at the end of the day, I started asking myself, I was like, well, it seems like I didn't fail, but it sure does seem like that because the opportunities just got taken away. And so
now,
I was like,
is this one of those situations where you were essentially working for someone else?
yeah. So at one point I was working for Tesla doing solar sales. I was working for a local fencing contractor doing construction grade fencing, Northwestern Mutual for life insurance, Equinox for membership sales for fitness.
Okay.
And I just had this like moment where I was just like, I was getting my real estate license anyways, but I was like, what am I going to do next? I'm like, well, sales has been a big part of my life. And I was like, well, I could honestly fail just as well on my own volition and have
that's true.
more control over what the outcome would be, or at least my focus. So I have always believed that real estate builds wealth. I feel that it builds financial security for a family if done right. And it's, home ownership's not for everybody, but it's my own personal belief. So I figured, if I can create direct impacts into people who I actually know, care about, then, why not build a business around that? Or why not bring value to the people who I know in that capacity?
I didn't realize you had such a deep background in sales. Because one of the things that really that's always fascinated me about you is your ability to just find business like through your relationships. Like that's like you don't have necessarily like a traditional sales pipeline or marketing strategy or anything like that. You just it's always been really fascinating to me, like whenever you do business, like you're like, oh yeah, I got this listing and I'm working with this buyer, and I'm how'd you find them? Oh yeah, we just from talking, I just we're friends, or I just know that person, or we're just connected, or I got referred from someone else. And it's not like the traditional methodologies of door knocking and what you typically see realtors do when they're trying to find do their business, or like open houses and events and all these other things. Right now, I know that you're kind of exploring that a little bit now, and that's, I think, more of a factor of like, hey, I want to grow now. What can I do?
Right. Absolutely.
But you kind of built a business without having to do any of those things, which I've always, that's always been kind of like at the back, like, how the hell does he do that? So I just didn't realize you had such a huge sort of sales background, which is How do you feel that's? I'm assuming you feel like that's played a factor in your ability to just kind of like easily introduce sort of the service that you offer as a realtor and all that. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you feel like it's impacted you?
So I think that probably the biggest lesson that I took away from like all of the different various sales experiences is, especially with life insurance sales was a little bit more of a hard sell, right? And that was my first sales job outside of college, and they very much were like, all right, here, write down everybody who your sphere, whether you know them from work, school, church, friends, family, and call them and let them know that you're in this business and you want to sit down with them to talk with it about
pretty
it.
Standard.
Standard stuff. And then they told me that you're going to bring along a qualified, somebody who's more seasoned in the business to help. And I thought that was a great idea at the beginning. But what I soon started to realize is that those seasoned individuals, the value of their time is so much more valuable than the value of my time from a dollar perspective because of their opportunity cost. So when they would go in, or I would go in myself with them, it was very much focused on kind of what they would call the fact finding, right? So they're asking the questions, but for the purposes of finding the product to push on them. And then it was very much kind of like a hard follow up with the push. So I quickly realized that just wasn't it. Like I would have a lot of people who would stop returning my phone calls just for phone calls that I was making, like not business related, just like checking in, see how you're doing. You want to go, I was fresh out of college. You want to go grab a beer or something?
Right. And they were just ghosting you.
Yeah, they're just ghosting me.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, here comes Chris again. What is he going to pitch me this time? So that kind of followed me. So the biggest lesson that I took away from that was that nobody wants to be hard sold. Yeah. I don't like to be hard sold.
Yeah.
So I started focusing on like how I would want to be sold or how I would want to be presented to.
Okay.
And I just started realizing like I do business with people, and I think that it's just in any industry they tell you that, but you do business with people who like and trust.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I started asking myself if I'm, not that these don't work, because clearly they work. A lot of people do them. But if I'm going to door knock or if I'm going to cold call and I have zero rapport with these individuals. They don't know me. They've got no idea who I'm about or what I am. So I've got to try and build rapport and find out if a business is available there. And I know that it works, but it's just not me. It doesn't fit my dynamic. So I started thinking, it's like, well, what can I do to just meet people so they get to know who I am, like why I do what I do, where they can just build trust in me as an individual, not just within my profession, but just, Chris is a good guy. Like at the end of the day, he has my interest at heart with whatever he's doing, whether that's just a regular conversation or if that's business or industry related. So now I just start thinking about how can I meet more people and start building those fundamental relationships and rapport and trust on a personal level. And then
that'll kind of translate.
Maybe it'll translate into business. Maybe it won't translate into business. Maybe it'll translate into a referral. Maybe it won't translate into a referral.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm going to be fulfilled with my relationships.
Sure.
And through those relationships, I think that as people get to know who I am, they're going to want to support me and support what I'm trying to do for both my family and my community. So my focus now has just been on delivering value to friends, family, to my community. That way they can get to know me, and hopefully I get the opportunity to service their real estate needs when those come about.
So, we do a lot of that, and in the coaching training, in the productivity coaching program, where we talk a lot about like leading with value, right? And don't focus on don't focus on like trying to get a listing or trying to get a buyer, right? Focus on solving problems, right? Build a relationship and help solve problems, because if every time you have a conversation with someone, you're helping them to solve a problem or something like that. Not every time, but at least most of the time, right? It's not a pitch of any kind. It's just like, oh, you're dealing with this issue. I know someone that can help you with that. Let me connect you, right? Even something as simple as that. Like, it helps people to kind of feel like, oh, this person is actually trying to help me. Right.
Absolutely.
And so I totally get where that's coming from. That's a good tactic.
It's like Gary Vaynerchuk, right? Like his thing, jab, 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 uppercut, right? Value.
Left hook, bro.
That's left hook, jab. Sorry, Gary. I apologize. But yeah, no, I think about that too, and it's like, also like meeting the person who you're connecting with where they're at in life right now, right? So what the statistic is, somebody may buy a home or sell a home every 5 to 7 years. So So if your focus is on talking to them about that
all the time, they're gonna stop calling you.
There's only like what 15 to 20% of those conversations are going to be relevant. The other 75, 80% are just, they provide zero meaning. Like I was listening to something a while ago, and they said, we talk to people a lot because we want to bring them value. We were talking about value, and we think about the things that we were going to say to bring value. But at the end of the day, value is based on the recipient of that information. It's not based on whether or not you feel you're bringing them value or not. You're only bringing them value. You're telling somebody, hey, I've got a great place that we can go and eat steak. Are you down? If they're not hungry, if they just ate, that doesn't matter. There's like
or they're
zero
vegan
value.
Or vegetarian or something like that.
Exactly. Zero value. So like you need to understand who you're talking to, and that's why I just kind of like adopted that thing where it's like, well, if 80 to 85% of the time they're not looking at real estate or they're not looking at this stuff, well then I need to connect with them. That way they get to know who I am.
So when that 20%
when that 20% comes, then I have the opportunity. Sprinkle in a little bit of real estate or whatever your profession is throughout that, but that shouldn't be your focus. That shouldn't be your goal.
That makes sense. So I have a question because you obviously have like a finance background.
Yeah.
And one of the big things that people in general I think are nervous about is just what's happening in the economy.
Hmm.
So I mean, I'd be interested to hear. Oh, is that your phone?
Was that mine?
Oh,
It was mine.
shameful. What time is it?
It's 9:13. It's John Hernandez. John, I'm not really sure why that I was recording a video. Now we know that like phone calls take precedence.
Yeah, you're gonna have to put on like do not disturb or something.
John.
That's right. For next time.
Yeah, it's probably not even recording anymore,
Yeah.
but it's okay.
That's all right. I just want to invite you to another podcast.
This is so much fun. I'm over here sipping my espresso shot, trying to make it last. I love it.
No, I just a lot of folks are just nervous about what's happening with the economy, and some people are even tying that to like the presidential elections and stuff like that. I'd be interested to kind of hear your thoughts on like what you're seeing, just both personally and from a business perspective in terms of like you know what you feel like is happening in the general business sector, and then how is that impacting your business, and maybe even some thoughts on like how you think that's going to kind of play out over time.
I'm gonna do not disturb this here in a minute, so we're just gonna have to splice that. So I think it's a great question. So I think about that a lot. Like the reality is that the economy has people worried, right? A lot of it has to do with just like headlines. Presidential election always creates uncertainties in that given year. So
and that's interesting because like statistically speaking, there's not really any data that supports that there's a real change in activity for like home sales.
No.
During presidential elections.
Sure.
Like people have like that mental thought process, but there's not really any data that.
I want to say, I think it's more, and I don't even know if it's the right thing. I think it's more because of the political theater around it all.
That makes
like
sense,
it's just kind of like, there's it doesn't matter what party you're for. It's just kind of like you think that things are going to end up happening if one party gets elected versus the other after the fact. So it's not that like really anything happens. Just everybody feels like that it needs to be at a standstill.
Yeah.
Because when you look into the future could be completely different, right? We're in what, June right now.
Yeah.
So in the next 7 months, in people's mind, I feel like, oh, well, in 7 months, it could be completely different. Like if the other party takes over, or even if the current party. So there's that
assumptions that are essentially
the assumptions. There's that uncertainty. So, and I get it, right? I mean, that's the reality that we live through. Just like the economy, we've got inflation and stuff like that, and it impacts people's decision.
Yeah.
Interest rates right now are the biggest thing from a real estate perspective that drastically are impacting buyers' ability to afford home. And the conversation that I have a lot, where I think is like, I get asked the question a lot, not just now, but just throughout the course of the career, is like, is it a good time to buy a home?
Yeah.
And like I've held the same position. It's always a great time to buy a home. But that's the wrong question that you're asking. The right question is it a good time for you to buy a home?
Yeah.
Right. So everybody, I feel like, is so focused on the externalities, like everything that they can't control, where they should be focusing on the stuff that they can control. Right. Like what does that, instead of worrying about the economy at large, focus on your microeconomy, right? Like what does your household budget look like, right? So, for instance, in today's market, I think the opportunity for those buyers who are ready, willing, and able is interest rates, because interest rates is artificially suppressing the demand that's still there. It hasn't gone away. It's just sitting on the sidelines.
Yeah.
So if you find yourself in a position that you're not stretching yourself and putting yourself in a bad financial situation, I truly believe that you making that decision to make a home purchase now, if that is your intent or if that is a goal, could prove to be a very great long-term investment or purchase. The opportunity.
And I think that's the trick, is a lot of people don't think of things in long terms, right? Especially when you're talking about like a home.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I'm on the commercial side, and folks who are buying commercial, typically they do think in the long term, right? It's not an immediate return.
Right.
Typically there's if they bought in the short term, they'd lose every time. Right. With some exceptions, there are some exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, this usually is not long-term investment. It's usually it's like a 5-year term or a 10-year term before they even consider, a sale or anything like that. And it really kind of boils down to like whether the numbers make sense. And what's interesting is that even though the economy has shifted, what we're seeing is that the more sophisticated, like, commercial investors are not stopping their activity. They're just adjusting how they invest,
Hmm.
right? They're just looking at numbers slightly differently. They're not necessarily being as aggressive, but
Right.
they're still transacting,
Yeah.
right? They're just looking at, like, how they can make the numbers that are currently going on today, how can they make those numbers work? And then looking out 5 to 10 years on, like, how that looks for them over the course of time.
Sure.
And and these are very sophisticated, you know, folks that are, like, spending a lot of money
Hmm.
to get into these commercial projects, and they're even continuing to, buy and sell real estate. So I think, another component of that is that, your typical homeowner is just, that's not what they do.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, they buy a home, like you said before, like maybe once every 5 to 7 years, which is, that's a long period of time
Yeah.
between, buying and selling a home. And, what was happening and what was going on 5 to 7 years ago is very different than what's happening now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So all of these sort of preconceived notions, and, even like what you mentioned earlier about the media and what the media is kind of
Hmm.
hyping up and whatnot, this whole NAR settlement situation, like, what's happening with
Yeah.
that, and everyone's kind of sideways about that whole situation, which is weird to me.
There's 20 million different opinions about
Yeah, it is.
what that means, what
It's
that's going to do.
yeah, there is. I do think it's worth having a conversation about, because I think people need to kind of at least understand as much as possible. But what's the thing is, it's hard for at least for me, when I'm talking to, like, my coaching clients and stuff, like, is that because it's an ever moving, like, target of
Hmm.
what is happening.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know half the stuff. Like, we have no idea. Like,
Yeah.
there's a good chance that this may happen, but it could change, right?
Absolutely.
And then even after the time frame actually, like, comes in and they make it official and all that good stuff, there's probably going to be a whole year of just, like, testing that new system, and
Hmm.
a bunch of holes that are going to be put into it, and they're going to have to say, yeah, we're going to have to change this again.
Yeah.
So, like, even the stuff that they're even suggesting is still, I feel like, is really just sort of like they're testing the waters. They have no idea how that's going to turn out. And what's kind of, I guess, what's frustrating for me is you have the DOJ, who doesn't seem to have a good understanding of how real estate ultimately works, and then they're trying to make rules on a thing that they're not really terribly familiar with,
Yeah.
right? So that's making it much more difficult. I think it's making it much more confusing for a traditional buyer and seller
Yeah.
to kind of understand how to get into the market and what they should be doing and how they should be thinking and all that other good stuff.
I think that the at the end of the day, they're trying to solve a problem that wasn't a problem to
Yeah.
begin with. Let me digress. So it's not that it wasn't a problem. The problem was that the public was not educated enough on how the transaction works or how it's set up. And I think
You know what? I don't know if that's necessarily. I mean, that may be part of it, but I would push back to even say that, you know, because the lawsuit happened in a different state, and
yeah,
the way they do business over there is different than every state is different, right?
right,
And
yeah,
they apply the terms of whatever was going on in that one state across, like, the entirety of the United States, and every state has different ways of doing real estate. Like Florida, we have transaction brokerages, right?
hmm,
Which is sort of anomalous to what you see in other states. Most states
yeah,
usually have, like, a buyer agent and a seller
seller agent,
agent, and like that, and they don't have dual agency, or they have limited dual
hmm,
agency, or, something like that, right? Where we have transaction brokerage, which is not really dual agency, but kind of in that
yeah. We're
realm.
just facilitating a transaction at
Yeah,
that point.
exactly.
Yeah,
So applying rules that, so let's say they had an issue over there. Like, I don't understand how that's applying across the United States. Like, every state has a different way of doing it and different ways of
yeah,
sharing the way that the, how uh, compensation is being distributed and all that good stuff. Like, so it just seems odd to me that there are different ways that every state will address real estate, and then they're applying one rule to go against
across all of the different
50,
ones.
Yeah, that just seems weird to me.
Yeah, that would be, you know, a great point that you bring up, that we have like a blanket ruling or a blanket lawsuit or issue that's kind of going to encompass the industry across the entire country, when in fact it's like, I don't know about you, I can't sell real estate in Oklahoma or Missouri or
you gotta have a separate license for that.
Yeah, I have to have a separate license for that. So it's kind of like, well, then if you use that for the same token, well, this is like, well, if I can't sell that without getting licensed over there, then how does rules and regulations affecting that particular state's real estate transaction business, how is that applicable over here? At the end of the day, I do think that it's going to be, I think it's opened up conversation, which I believe is good. Right? A lot of stuff, like the consumers, I feel the overall consumers just, you know, they kind of see a real estate agent as somebody who's just helping the transaction, or, you know, you see it's like, oh, they're just going to list the home and then they sit back on a beach.
Right.
You know,
well,
I prefer,
reality TV. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer a mountain cabin myself.
Right.
But you know, and then like we just don't do anything. And then the same thing with like on the buyer side, right? Like we're just opening doors and showing the homes, and then we're going to write a piece of paper. And then I hear that buyer agents, they like to go more to the beach than winter cabins. So they might find themselves there.
And if I remember correctly, most of them take their clients out in their Bentleys.
That's yes. That's what the buyer's agents, listing agents have Rolls Royces. But I just think that it's just one of those things where, you know, for better or worse, nobody's is really the culprit, but I just think that it was just a lack of understanding and a lack of transparency around how the real estate transaction works and how people get compensated and where the value is. And, you know, I would argue that you know, maybe the onus more or less is on us as real estate agents, because we're the experts in how that works. And so, you know, our maybe lack of having those conversations maybe aided in this happening. It's kind of like, you know, you go to a doctor and they ask, you know, do you have any questions? But they haven't really delved into, you know,
they didn't know what questions to ask.
How do I know what questions to ask? You're the professional. I've come here to hope that you are going to help me uncover, like asking those probing questions that are going to help you better lead.
Well, I think that's a lot that, you know, I think that leads very much into what I think why we see that is because the barrier to entry to get into real estate is relatively low as far as licensing.
Sure.
Right. So, I mean, anyone.
Capital expense is very low.
Yeah. And then, you know, the test is not terribly difficult. It's just annoying more than anything else. A little bit confusing, but you can pass it, right? If you take it enough times,
you can pass it. Yeah, exactly.
There's no like limit.
There's no limit. Yeah.
Eventually, you're just going to memorize the damn questions, and it'll make sense.
Maybe our license number, one of the numbers should be like the number that represents the amount of time it takes a test.
But you know, so the barrier to entry is relatively low. But I think that, and it's funny because now one of the rules that I don't mind, and I thought, oh well, I already do this as professional standard, is the whole buyer agreement that they put into place. I mean, to me, it seems odd that you would even do business with someone and not have an agreement in place.
Sure.
So I've been doing that since the beginning of my business. So them having that requirement, which seems, I mean, that seems like that.
It's kind of always been the requirement. It just hasn't really been practiced.
Well, it's not. I don't know that it's been the requirement, because it's not been required for you to have a buyer agent agreement in order for you to transact. Right. That's not been a requirement.
Right. Yeah.
It is a good business practice to have an agreement with someone in order for you to do a transaction. Mm-hmm. Right. Just like, you know, so there are things that are, I guess, rules, and there are things that are customary. Right. And then there are things that are just good business practices.
Right.
Right. So I think like the buyer agent agreement, for example, that they're requiring, that's perfectly fine. I already do a buyer agent agreement. Yeah. It's a very normal thing in my business. I just a professional standard. If you and I can't agree to work together like officially, then we're just not good fit.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
That's fine. That may be a less experienced agent willing to work with you to do that, right? So I don't have a problem with that. And then there are customary things like, you know, people. I always hear people saying, oh well, you know, the sellers are responsible for paying the buyer agent, right? So the buyer doesn't have a cost. And to me, I never saw it that way. Like, I always saw it as it's always been the buyer's responsibility to pay the buyer agent because the buyer is getting a service from the buyer agent.
Right.
However, it's been customary for the seller to cover that cost because it's in their best interest to do so.
Right.
You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So
they're the ones with the equity to make
yeah,
that
it's
make that
just
happen.
easier for them. They don't have to bring a bunch of cash to the table to make a deal happen. So it just makes sense.
I think as real estate agents, though, have just perpetuated that narrative.
I would agree with you.
Like,
Yeah.
so that's why, as agents right now, as we transition through this, we're going to have challenges in the broader market when it comes to buyers, because us as real estate agents on the buyer side who weren't implementing these agreements, you see it on social media all the time, whether it's new construction or whatever it is, you need to use a buyer's agent because it's a free service to you.
Right.
Right. It's a free service.
Yeah.
And I've always held the position, it's like, it's not a free service.
Yeah.
Somebody is
Somebody's
making
yeah.
that payment.
Yeah.
Right. And, so the conversations that I have with it is like, hey, here's my professional fee through the buyer's agency agreement,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, I'm representing you,
Yeah.
representing your interests, and whatever I can recuperate from the other side to
Yeah.
cover that cost, that's what I'm going to do. But I
Right.
want to have that agreement that here's what you expect from me,
Yeah,
and here's
yeah.
what I expect from you, because at the end of the day, I don't work for the other party.
Right.
And if you don't want that representation, then you can go directly to the list agent, or you can go directly to the sales rep for the builder. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But I think it just depends on where the buyer finds the value. If
Yeah.
they see that value, and if you're able to deliver the value that you feel you need to deliver, by understanding where they're at and what they need, because again, value is not what you're telling them; it's how they're receiving it.
Yeah, yeah.
So
interesting. Yeah, no, I would completely agree with that. So I'm interested to see how this all plays out. I feel like it's going to be kind of a bit of a circus for the next year.
Yeah. Fun.
Yeah, I'm actually excited about it because I feel like it's really going to kind of separate the kids from the adults, right? So
I think it's going to add another level of professionalism to
I
our
would
business.
agree. Yeah, I would agree. So that's good. I mean, for me, I think that's good. I mean, it's basically I feel like I'm in a bit of an advantage because not only have I been operating that way, I train that way. So I feel like everyone
business as usual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
business as usual.
Like everyone else has to kind of like level up, and I'm like, I'm already here. So
yeah.
How can I level up from where I'm at so that I'm still ahead of them, right?
Exactly.
So I figure that out. So I'm actually super excited about it. I think it's going to be, there are going to be some good things that come from it. There are probably going to be some headaches that come from it.
Sure.
But there's, like I think like anything else, we have to just be flexible and adjust. The good thing about the way agents work is that every agent isn't typically like it's an individual business, and that allows for us as agents to be a lot more, to be really nimble, right? It's not like we're some big conglomerate.
Company. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's not like we got to turn the Titanic whenever it's happening.
Yeah.
It's just us, or maybe a small team.
Yeah, or a small team. Yeah.
Exactly.
Even big teams, for all intents and purposes, can pivot relatively quickly, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's just going to be like everyone's going to be kind of like playing just sort of bob and weave until we kind of get through it, and then the agents that just can't handle it, they're just going to get out. They're going to get out of the business. And like you said, I think that's going to essentially weed out sort of the garbage, and then have the professionals will be able to kind of really showcase what they actually bring to the table, which I think will be good at the end of the day.
Well, I think it's we'll be able to showcase what we bring to the table during the transaction, right before the transaction. Yeah. But I also think that a lot of the value that we bring to the table is what are we doing during that that 4 to 6 year period where they're not buying a home, right? So like what value are we bringing to them, whether that be indirectly related to real estate, directly related to real estate, or just being that person where you're earning that business throughout that time. You're not just earning the business when you sit at the table and we're talking about what we're going to list a home for, what you're going to buy the home for. But like, I think that a lot of that intangible value is built through that time frame, and then the tangibleness of our profession gets implemented once we've earned that right during the transaction.
Right. And you know what, because there's so much uncertainty, typically people during times of uncertainty, they're very cautious about like who they do anything with. Right. So, this is going to be a time where, the investment in time to build that relationship so you can build that trust combined with, your experience in the business, right? So people are going to want to work not only with people they know, but people they know and trust.
Right.
So all of a sudden, the aunt or cousin who got into real estate and has been in real estate for 10 years but has done 2 transactions
Yeah.
is not as exciting to work with anymore.
Right.
You're like, I want to hook up my cousin, but I don't know if I want to put my 6-figure asset under a person who's only done 2 transactions.
Yeah.
Right? Now all of a sudden you really want to be a little bit more critical of the person that you're working with. So you might trust your cousin, but they don't necessarily like. You may know your cousin, but you may not trust them as in their experience, right? So I do think during times of uncertainty, people are going to lean heavy on like people who have experience, and then people that they trust who have experience even more so.
Absolutely.
So I think the building of those relationships are gonna make a difference for those agents that are willing to go through that extra effort. Which I think that's going to be cool. I think it's going to be interesting to see because I think that's also going to change the way that agents engage with their clients, and like clients start to be seen more as friends and colleagues, right? And like it's just sort of going to be a little bit different dynamic,
right?
You know what I'm saying? Because I think that in order for them to stay in business, it's almost going to have to be a strategy.
Yeah, it's not just like a side hobby.
Yeah,
that you're just like,
let me just do this add-on.
Let me just do this add-on kind of a thing, And we could, people are going to disagree about how we got where we're at right now with that lawsuit and all of that. But I don't think that really. I mean, maybe there's going to be people out there, but I think that for the most part, the majority of professionals in the business are of the mindset that this is going to be good for our industry.
Yeah.
From a relationship standpoint, from customer awareness standpoint, transparency, like all of that, and then just a level of professionalism that the consumer is going to be able to expect from their real estate agent, whoever it is that they decide to choose.
Right.
So, and it gives them a little bit more. It's like, what, maybe I should do a little bit more due diligence on who I choose.
Right.
Which leads me back to why it's so important to build that value and that relationship during the period in which they're not in need, because that is where that trust, respect, and expertise that they're going to be looking for is going to be built. That way, when you're having those conversations there, you're not really having to, maybe you're competing against other agents or for the business, but at the end of the day, I mean, my mindset is I just want to deliver as much value as I can. That way, my customers, when and if they become my customers, just have the absolute trust in me that I not only know what I'm doing, but at the end of the day, I have their interest first and foremost before anybody else.
Yeah, I like that. So I before we go, I wanted to knowing that you have this finance background, one of the things that has been really interesting to me that I feel like I don't really hear about very much, and I don't know if you know how much you know about this at all, but from economy question, right? Internationally, the dollar has been used to buy oil, and it's been the petrodollar and stuff like that, and now there's been some changes that are happening. They're actively happening right now with bricks. Are you familiar with bricks?
Bricks?
Yeah.
Like actual building bricks?
No. So there's an organization called BRICS, which is establishing sort of a new currency. Have you not heard about this?
I actually haven't.
This is really interesting.
Okay.
So
BRI like CS?
It's BRICS.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
And it stands for the main nations that started it, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Okay.
So those are the main nations that started it. Probably, I think 2000. I want to say 12 or 14 or something.
It's supposed to be like a global currency kind of a thing.
Well, initially they were just sort of like, I think they were initially just trying to create like a financial relationship, and it seems to be evolving into wanting to identify an alternative currency for trading energy, essentially, right? So right now, well, not right now, but historically, since I think since World War II, the United States has been the dollar has been the currency that you have to trade oil in the dollar, the petrodollar. I've heard this term before, right? And that has helped our economy substantially, because that means that every country in the world needs to have some reserve of
the U.S.
dollar in order to be able to buy oil. So that's good for our economy, right? It's good for the dollar, which ultimately impacts our economy. But now you have this new BRICS organization, which is basically trying to identify an alternative to the petrodollar, and we're starting to see countries that are starting to trade in alternative currencies. I think right now the Indian rupee is at the top of the list to potentially be the currency that BRICS might be using or might consider using as the currency. But I know that Saudi Arabia, I believe, traded with China and the Chinese yuan or what? I don't remember.
I think it's yuan.
Yuan, right? Yeah. But I don't know if that's necessarily like, hey, they're testing the waters, or if they're just kind of doing it that one time, or if that is where they're leaning. I'm not really sure. But this is they canceled their agreement with, or they did not renew. They didn't cancel. They did not renew their agreement with the United States to only trade in U.S. dollars. So now that means that they're open to trading in other currencies. Yeah. So that can ultimately impact our economy, because if we have
the demand for that dollar is going down.
Yeah, if it goes down, that means, and we have inflation on the other side of it.
Yeah.
Right, from us printing money. Right, so that those two things could ultimately have sort of a negative impact in our currency and ultimately in our economy at large.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would definitely say it would be worth your time to look into that, because right now I think there are like 42 nations that are signed up with BRICS. So it was initially those 5 nations, but then about 42 nations. I want to say it's 42. It's either 42 have signed up, or maybe half of them have signed up, and the other half are wanting to sign up, or something like that. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
So, but it's been fascinating to me, because conceptually I can see how that can have sort of a detrimental effect on the U.S. economy, and like what ultimately are we doing as a nation to be able to sort of counter that.
Yeah.
Like, because that can ultimately be that could be problematic, right? Yeah. So I'm interested. I'm interested to hear. Well, obviously you would need to do some more homework on it to kind of learn more about it. But I mean, I would be interested to hear kind of your thoughts on that, because it's something that I think is important for us as Americans to know about, but nobody's talking about it. It seems like a really big deal, and I'm not hearing about it on the news. I'm not hearing about it like anywhere. Like, no one's really having conversations about like this whole infrastructure that's being built to replace the petrodollar, which has been sort of one of the core tenets of how our economy has really established itself as the dominant currency in the world. Right? It's kind of like what because before the U.S. dollar, the dominant currency was the British pound.
Yeah.
And then that they were also essentially all over the world. They had, and then they've essentially shrunk back down to their islands, right?
Yep.
You know what I mean? That was the Great Britain was the dominant force in the world, and then now they're like back to their island. And not that they're not dominant. They got a ton of money and a lot of influence, but it's not the same as what it was before. The United States sort of took over. So now the question becomes, well, what happens when the U.S. dollar is no longer the primary currency? Is there what happens to us in terms of like our economy? Is that going to make it more difficult for us? I mean, there's all kinds of other issues with corporatism and stuff like that we have to solve here in the country. But that one in particular seems particularly disconcerting, at least for me. Where how do you and who is even the person to even talk to about fixing that problem?
Yeah.
Right? Like, is that a presidential thing? Like, maybe, I don't know. Like, I don't know if that's does the president matter on that, or is that like a congressional thing? Like, how do you fix that? Like, not that you even fix it. Like, how do you adjust for that? Right? Because I don't know that you can't turn that switch off.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like, oh well, we'll go over there and we'll tell them to switch it off, and then we'll just take over. Like, you can't. You know what I mean?
I find currency very interesting, like even in my studies and stuff. And I'll be the first person to say, like, it's a little bit outside of like currency is so complex when it comes to global economics, like and how that works. Like, I mean, there's people out there who in finance who specifically are focused on arbitrage opportunities between currencies in different markets.
Oh yeah, no, I have a friend of mine actually who that's all he does. That's his business.
So
I mean, he's just like trading currencies all day
trading on
long.
this market, buying on this market, selling on this market, making like, you know, and then just now those margins have gotten smaller and stuff because of you know, high frequency trading and things like that. But I mean, when I think about it, just like from a high level, like, you know, we got off the gold standard. When did we get off the gold standard? I don't even remember.
In the 40s.
In the 40s, right? And then went on. And so now we've got the fiat dollar, right? And I think that there was so much trust just in our country as a whole and the growth exponential that we were having, that our dollar just kind of naturally took the lead on being the global currency.
Well, I mean, I think that was very much tied to the fact that we were the petrodollar, right?
We were taught. Yeah, back to your point.
I think that was one of the reasons why people were like, "Oh, well, everyone has a dollar. Like, why wouldn't we?
Why wouldn't we have the? Why wouldn't we have?
And our economy was super strong at the time.
Yeah.
And like, it's like, well, of course you trust. Like, it's like going to like, do you trust the billionaire who lives at the end of the street to loan you $20? You're like, yeah, I'm sure. Or if he asks you for
$20,
like, yeah, sure, I'll loan you $20.
Right.
For sure, he's good for it. Like, the guy's a billionaire.
Yeah. So I think that like that brick that you were talking about, I think is very, because my first question where my mind went first is like, well, who's controlling that particular currency if it gets off the ground, right? Yeah. Is it like, you know, is it kind of like the United Nations where you've got all of the different nations who are comprised of it, and in order to print more money or retract more money, you have to have it's an agreement across all those countries.
So that's
right?
That's how it works. Yes.
So I think that's very interesting because one of the biggest,
that's almost democratizing currency, which is really interesting.
Which is very interesting because I mean, in the short term, like individual countries would get impacted by that change, especially the U.S. with us being, you know,
like bad for us.
The peg, our dollar's pegged to a lot of currency. But you know, not just in the U.S., but in every individual country, the biggest risk with currency is individual domestic economic risk, political risk, and then you just got the supply and demand of it, right? So I think that, you know, politics, whichever way you read, we've printed a lot of money.
Oh, for sure.
We've printed, you know, it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Independent, or Republican. You can't argue that we have printed a lot of money.
Crap ton of money.
And, you know, I think one of the biggest arguments is like, well, how are we going to pay for that money?
Yeah.
Right. Who's paying for that, or where is that coming from? Like, you know, from a budget standpoint or whatever it is.
Well, trust me, it's we got it.
We got it. We full faith in the United States government. It's printed on the dollar bill.
It's in a cabinet back here.
Yeah, exactly. So I just think that, you know, I think that people are starting to look at that, like if we can create a more stabilized currency, if you will, to where it's not just one nation, because everybody could love the dollar, but nobody has any say on how much of that dollar can be in circulation outside of the United States.
Right.
Just like with Great Britain, their pound, nobody has any say over that. Like they control that completely. So the internal politics of a nation, and ours, since we're in the United States, is like, if we decide to print money, or Congress decides to print money, then they have to deal with the repercussions of that, or how they're going to juggle that. Meanwhile, the optics coming from other countries who are looking at it, it's like, whoa, well, you know, how risky is the dollar?
Right.
Because they keep printing it, so the value keeps going down, and then that creates inflation around other assets, which internationally is going to impact them domestically too. So how can we create a more stabilized dollar, if you will, which I think is what Bitcoin was striving to do from, you know, the cryptocurrency standpoint.
The challenge with crypto is that there's so much volatility in crypto. And I mean, we're not really seeing it stabilize very much. I mean, it's stabilized more than it has in the past, but I think that's the biggest challenge. You can't have a currency that has so much volatility, and I'm a big advocate of cryptocurrency. I love the idea.
I think that a lot of the volatility comes from that it has not we call it cryptocurrency, but it has not established itself as a viable means of currency. Like it's still traded, I feel, as more of an asset. Like people speculate on, hey, I'm going to hold it, and then try and get where the whole reason why currency works is because of the stabilization.
But okay. So are you suggesting that the crypto, like we need to stabilize crypto? Like for me, like currency should naturally stabilize. In order for it to be considered currency, there should be like sort of a natural progression for stabilization in the currency itself.
Right. That's through supply and demand.
Well,
like the fundamentals of it being supply and demand.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean that does it requires people to trust. So if I wanted to, let's say, well, I wanted to buy a property with cryptocurrency, the problem with that, if I'm the seller, is that let's say I say okay to receiving cryptocurrency, right? And I get the I sell the property to you for $500,000 worth of cryptocurrency,
right?
Bitcoin, for example, right? And then if Bitcoin, like as it's unstable, if it crashes down to 250, now I'm like, oh shit, like
right,
I have now half of the value that I initially had, and I have to hope that cryptocurrency will come back up. But there's all this sort of up and down, and as far as currency is concerned, that makes it very difficult to trade in crypto, right? When you don't have that stability, like there needs to be something to hold it stable. Now, I think that if you were able to get enough assets, if you were able to get, let's say, a cryptocurrency that was like that had a basis in some kind of asset that doesn't necessarily change in value very much. So property would be an example of that. Gold would be an example of that, right? Where there is some movement in the value of those things, but it's slow. Like it typically is very slow, right? Then it would make sense for, like, if a crypto is kind of tied to those assets, then that cryptocurrency will likely stabilize, and then it would be more comfortable for someone to say, I'll buy this mug for crypto, or I'll buy this camera for crypto, or I'll buy whatever for crypto, because there's sort of a stabilization that's happened. But you have to have that on a pretty large scale in order for you to see crypto as a stabilized currency.
I think you brought a good point up to that. It's like, so like our dollar was stabilized on the gold standard, right? And then when we went to the fiat system, it was stabilized because of the petrodollar, right? Because of that need. So I think that, like, even from, so maybe that is, so it is a supply and demand, but we need to have, you know, there needs to be something that anchors that crypto in order to create that stability. Because if you sell me, you know, if you want to buy a car from me and I'm willing to accept Bitcoin and you pay me in Bitcoin, I have to have the confidence that the value of that Bitcoin is going to remain relatively the same in order for me to continue holding
or increase
that Bitcoin or increase, right? But I would hope, like we like when you pay for something, if somebody buys you, or we're in the real estate business, you get paid for a real estate transaction. In your mind, you're not like, oh, well, I'm going to hold this, but I hope the dollar increases.
Right.
You're using it because that is the form of today's barter. It's a form of trade, right?
Right.
So if we're paying in crypto right now, and you pay me $40,000 worth of crypto, right?
You want to be able to use it today.
I want to be able to use it, or I want to be able to use it a month from now and have confidence that my buying power hasn't substantially decreased.
Right.
Right. And if I have that fear and I don't have that confidence, I'm not going to hold that Bitcoin.
Right.
I'm going to sell it, which just adds to the volatility of the asset. Right. So back to the stabilization, like whether it's pegged to something, whether, you know, maybe Bitcoin becomes pegged to that brick, if that comes to where it's at.
I mean, I don't know. Right now they're trying to, because right now those countries are all like, they're hoarding like assets, go between property, gold, like precious metals, right? They're hoarding a lot of that stuff because they're trying to establish a currency that's based on some kind of asset, or a combination of like real hard assets.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that's going to ultimately turn out, but that's a smart move.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to stabilize your currency and you want to ensure
you got collateral against
you got collateral against it. Yeah. Like you don't have to trust me. I got a bunch of gold and diamonds and stones and properties to back up this currency. So you don't have to trust me. Like I don't need to be like, hey, trust me. I don't need to say that. I can be like, hey, I got a big pile of gold behind me that says that I'm good for it. Right. So I think that's a smart tactic. I think that it would be smart for the United States to start doing that. We have a lot of assets here.
We do.
It would make a lot of sense for, you know, the whoever is in control right now. I think it's the Fed, of like stabilizing the currency, is to figure out some way to ensure that if the petrodollar goes away or is weakened substantially, that there's some other thing that's helping to stabilize the dollar to keep us in, keep the dollar in circulation, that keep the high trust in the dollar so that it doesn't lose value, at least not substantially.
Well, something that you're talking about, the petrodollar too, is like, we're in this movement to clean energy, green energy, right? Which is going to reduce the demand for petrol. It's going to reduce the demand, like how much is going to be used for different things. I feel so. Like, I mean, do you see that being?
Maybe.
I don't think it's going to be substantially.
Yeah, I think
less,
we're going to still use,
but
we'll probably.
It'll be a slow transition.
Yeah.
It's not like it's going to happen next year.
Yeah.
But
because you're talking about the whole world, right? It's going to be hard for the whole world to transition into green energy. I mean, you're talking about nations that are just now getting out of third world. They have.
But what about us, who, like, our country is pushing toward, we're part of the country, right? This the initiative to push towards this. But if us as a country are pushing to use less petroleum, less fossil fuels, how is our dollar still going to be the anchor to that? Like, how would we
anchor to petrol?
Well, the U.S. dollar is the petrodollar, right? So
well,
so it's kind of like, if we're not in support, if we're not utilizing those resources and stuff, like, how does our currency hold that?
I think that one of the things that we can counter is, one of the things that we can do, this is a whole other conversation, but one of the things that I think we can kind of get into, this is my perspective, is if we can start making shit again, like, that'll make
making stuff domestically.
If
instead of outsourcing out everywhere.
If we can provide, because now we're providing value. So, let's say we're not using as much oil, but that means that we're still getting oil, and other countries are using it, so we can still sell it.
Yeah.
Right. So that makes us a commodity to the global system, so that, the dollar is powerful because we have so much oil, so much resources, so many, like, it could be food, it could be building widgets, it doesn't matter. Like, if we're building stuff here and we're selling that stuff that we're building out to the world, then that's where the trust in the dollar comes back into the fray. Right. We've just gotten away from that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we don't make a whole lot of stuff.
We don't make a lot of
We don't make a whole lot of stuff here.
You got the occasional person who makes, like, t-shirts and, like, printed mugs.
Well, I know we're wrapping up, but to that, I want to get your perspective on this. So I'm all for bringing jobs back. I think that's important. But how do you see that affecting the inflation in economics, right? If we bring that stuff back, because one of the reasons why we outsource so many things is because cheaper labor, cheaper costs, right? We can't compete from a labor and a cost perspective. And we've got a lot of Americans who want to bring jobs back. Yeah. But when I think about that, it's like, I'd love to bring the jobs back, but us as Americans demand higher wages. Yeah. Right. So when we demand higher wages, we can't afford ourselves. Or if we afford ourselves, then that's going to push prices up too, to compensate for that. So it's like, how do we, how do you see that transition happening?
I think that being very much a service-based economy is going to be a big part of that, right? Where we can provide services that other nations that maybe don't have the infrastructure to provide. Yeah. So I think that'll be part of it. And I think that, like, getting into highly specialized manufacturing, like sort of more advanced manufacturing and stuff like that, we got to get back into doing, like, trade schools and stuff like that for very highly specialized types of manufacturing and production and distribution, right? Where it requires a person to have a very specific skill set and knowledge to be able to do a thing, which is the advantage that we would have over third world countries like Mexico and all these other countries that don't necessarily have an education system in place.
For the specialization.
Yeah, like our education system is horrible, right? Like we have an education system that's designed to basically get people to work in a factory.
Yeah, manufacturing. It's a labor force.
That's basically our whole education system is designed around that, right? Like, we don't have an education system that's designed to help people understand, like, a couple of things. One, what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? That's an option. You don't see that anywhere in school, right? The other thing is there's not really any trade. We don't see any kind of trades anymore. Like, and
trades, apprenticeships.
And that, even simple stuff, like, even if you go to, like, electricians, plumbers, like, there's not a lot of those guys. Those guys are, like, they're begging for people to work, and they can't even find good workers. And those trades pay really well.
They do. They just used an electrician the other week. Yeah, we get paid real well.
You get paid really well, but a lot of people are not going into those fields for whatever reason. And a lot of it is, I don't think they realize what that's even an option or whatever. They're just going to regular school. There's not like a trade to be able to go into, right? And then I would layer that on top of like more advanced trades where you're doing like circuit manufacturing and all these sort of like advanced technological manufacturing elements where we should be building that stuff here because those are like high cost items, which means that we can afford the labor force to build those things and the companies can still be profitable. Right. So I think we just have to look at stuff differently. And that's going to be a cultural change, I think, that needs to happen. So. That's not just more laws or more rules. Like it's a cultural thing that kind of needs to come together. As a nation, I think we need to kind of shift the way we think about the United States, how we think of ourselves, how we think about how our place in the United States and then our place in the world. Like we have to be thinking like that. And right now we don't think like that. I think that's the big challenge.
Very good.
That's all I got.
I love it. I love it. It's awesome.
All right, cool. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming out and having
thanks for having me. This was fun.
Yeah,
this was actually a good time.
Yeah, good. All right, I'm glad. So, where can people find you, man?
You can find me on Instagram, chrischuck realtor.
Okay.
You can find me on Facebook at chrischuck realtor.
Okay, easy.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can find me on Google at chrischuck realtor.
That's awesome. Real simple. So
real simple.
If anyone wants to find you, has questions about residential real estate, they can find you at all kinds of places.
All kinds of places.
Okay, cool. And you're just on the way out. You're also doing you're starting a new like lifestyle thing, right? You're going to be doing.
Yeah. So
talk a little bit about that, just so people can kind of get ready for that, because I know that's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah. So like the social media, I want to do like a education and lifestyle kind of stuff. So like part of the content is going to be like education around whether it's buying or selling a home or transitioning up from a home or something investment related, real estate related, and then doing kind of like a focus on like a particular neighborhood or community in a particular area, and then followed by some content with like some individual business shout outs or individual places that you couldn't go if you were to move, live, or visit in that area.
I gotcha.
To provide some people some
what it would be like to live there.
Yeah, what it would be like to live there, or what it would be like if you visited, just so you don't go there and like, well, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I know that we all get that at home, right? So what are we doing tonight? What are we going to dinner for? What are we doing?
So you're going to kind of help people understand like what they could do.
Yeah, absolutely,
cool.
and hopefully support some small businesses locally too.
Sweet.
Because not to digress back into our conversation, but I think that a lot of the big businesses which provide a lot of value, it makes it challenging for smaller businesses too. So trying to get some exposure out to small businesses and hopefully push some business from the local community back to them to help keep the dollars within the local community.
I love that.
Fantastic.
So, very cool, man.
Yeah.
All right, sweet, man.
Cool.
Well, I appreciate you.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks again, man.
We're still live.
Yeah, we're still live, but we're out. Peace.
That was fun.